Airport 75 takes us to the skies once more, but this time it's a mid-air collision that leaves the plane without any pilots. It's up to a flight attendant to keep the passengers alive. And I don't know what it is about this franchise, but we don't agree on this one either, so let's check it out. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Let's see if we can land this thing by the seat of our pants.
This is a movie podcast, and we are working through Airport season. What is Airport season? Well, Airport is a movie franchise from the 70s. It was actually the franchise that started the entire disaster movie craze. This in many ways is our third season of 70s disaster movies. So we did the original Airport last week, and today we're doing the first sequel, which was Airport 1975. So
released in 1974, because of course they couldn't be consistent.
I mean, you say that, but I'm so used to video games with years in them releasing before the year that's in the title every single year. This doesn't even faze me.
Fair enough.
If anything, I think it's weird that the next two sequels actually came out in the years that are in the titles.
I mean, the only time that I remember this being a thing was right at the turn of the millennium, because everything was calling itself 2000, like the year before and the year after.
Yeah, happens with sports games. I don't even play sports games, but I know what happens with them.
Oh, well, yeah, the sports games, but that's about cashing in on the next season. Like, that's making that happen. I've never heard about it for anything other besides sports games.
Like, maybe the movie got delayed, right? Maybe it was meant to come out in 74. No. Actually, no, I'm talking nonsense. It's the opposite way around.
Yeah. They were like, oh, wait, all these other disaster movies are coming out. We got to beat the season. We got to be the first.
I mean, you say that, but I'm pretty sure more, because Tower and Inferno was 74, so I feel like they pulled it forward into more disasters, not pushed it away into... Anyway, so yes, we're going to talk about Airport 1975. I'll give you the general premise on that in a second, but we will start spoiler-free, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get into the spoilers, and of course, if you're enjoying the show on YouTube, hit the like button. It helps out a bunch if you do, and you can get bonus shows every month on Patreon, but I'll tell you more about that at the end of the episode. So... this is pretty disconnected from the first Airport, and we kind of expected that, given that aside from George Kennedy's character who is back, it's a new cast, so other than the fact that it's another movie about a plane doing something wrong, that's it, that's all you need, and that's fine. So it basically makes it another standalone movie. It'd be very easy to watch this without having seen the first one, but I think it's interesting to watch them in order and sort of see the progression and how, like, what they've figured out to do time after time with the new ones. What I noticed in the credits of this, actually, is that it said based on the movie Airport, but then also said it was based on a book, which makes me think this is a Die Hard situation, where they found another book about a plane, and then kind of just, retrofitted it into Airport. And to be fair, other than adding in one character who was in the previous movie, there's not a lot they had to do.
Right.
So it's ripe for the exploitation of the movie franchise in this case. So, but yes, Airport 75 is about a plane that there's no villain in this movie or anything like that. It's just an accident that happens when a small private jet crashes into the front of the plane and takes out the pilots, and oh no, there's no one to fly the plane. And I won't spoil anything they do to try and solve that, but that becomes the crisis that they're all dealing with for the rest of the movie. So there's your basic premise. We got Charlton Heston in this. That's kind of your big star, fresh off Skyjacked, which he did just a couple of years prior. So that's an interesting little bit of lineage for us. It
seems he had a big plane interest around this time. He was taking a lot of plane movies.
Yeah, it's just because we have the context of having done all those other disaster movies. It's just here he is, and this is the same year that Earthquake came out, which also starred George Kennedy. So there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, back when we did the last disaster season, I tried to make a little map because I noticed how many reoccurring actors there were, and there was so much overlap between things, but there were a few that were just a little bit off to the side, things I couldn't connect. I feel like post-Airport season, we're probably going to be able to tie those in, because it is more of all the same people.
Yeah. Plus, if you want to tie it to The Exorcist, Linda Blair's here.
Not quite sure that's a disaster movie, but You want to?
Are you saying things went smoothly in The Exorcist?
Are you saying that there's any movie where things just go smoothly the entire time?
Yeah, Hot Frosty.
There's mild controversy throughout.
Mild, very mild. Yeah, Linda Blair's back, and she's once again possessed, although this time she's possessed with a bad kidney.
Yeah, that's fair.
I thought of that line as I was watching the movie, and by God, I was going to use it. So, yes.
Now, at the end of last week's review, you said, right at the very end,
yes.
Oh, like something that made you hopeful, something that you saw and you were like, oh, yes. Okay. What made you hopeful? What was it?
Well, the description kind of described what they were going to try and do in the back half of the movie, and that's what I don't want to spoil it here in this review yet. But
all right, I wasn't sure if like it was an actor or like the director.
No, it wasn't
or something.
An actor. No, okay, no, it was how absurd the plot sounded like it might get.
Okay,
so we'll see in a bit if it managed to meet any expectations I may have given myself based on one sentence. So, David, what did you think of Airport 1975?
Well, I finished watching this probably about an hour and a half ago. I couldn't tell you a single character's name. And we said over and over again in Airport how they set up all of these things and like, oh, some of them paid off, some of them didn't. Like, it was kind of hit or miss. They set up a bunch of characters here very half-assedly, and then immediately none of them matter. And this movie is 100% like, I don't want to say a cash-in version, but like it just feels so much cheaper than the first one. Suffice to say, I didn't really like this movie. I think I was more so bored throughout most of it. It just felt like there was... I don't want to say no tension, because there were moments where it did actually manage to do something interesting, but throughout the entire back half of this movie, once the inciting incident happened, I felt like it never reached that peak of interest again. The inciting incident was the most interesting thing, and all of the, oh, we're dealing with this now stuff just kind of felt like, oh, this is just like what they would actually do in this situation. Like, this just felt like a normal like thing. And anytime there was a mild hiccup thrown into it, which is what these disaster movies are known for, is, okay, you solved problem A, now here comes problem B. They're the tiniest little things that are just immediately fixable. So, I don't know. I was just kind of bored throughout this entire thing, which is a damning thing for this movie to be, because it's supposed to be this high tension, oh God, what's going to happen sort of movie. So, yeah.
I liked it more than the first one.
Oof. I hard disagree. Oh, man.
Yep. That's not a bit. I'm being serious. Now, that's not to say that I think this is an excellent movie by any means. It is a little bit sloppy. It's a bit schlocky. And yes, almost none of the side characters who are the passengers on the plane barely... Other than just the fact that they amount to the characters who will die if things don't go well. Right? That's really all they are. They don't really have any mini arcs. They don't have any little things. They're just... I think it does a decent enough job of like, okay, you remember some of the characters. I mean, not the names, obviously, because I don't... Whatever. But, like, you know, you remember the sick girl. You remember the nun. You remember the sort of the old-timey Hollywood actress who's going on about her past. You remember Jerry Stiller's asleep. Like, you've got all of this playing out. But I actually disagree that once the incident happens, I think the back half was pretty entertaining. And I had a pretty decent time watching along with this one. Okay. I think it did some things that were mostly just fun, but there was one thing in particular that when we get into spoilers, I'm going to call out is actually being a little smart. Okay. So, you know, we'll get to it. Now, what's so funny though is the complaint you made about it felt like, oh, they're just doing the things they would do in this situation. And I'm like, part of the reason why I like this is because it's so batshit kind of an insane, like the situation they get themselves into where somehow the plane is fine and all the passengers and like the rest of the crew are still there, but just the pilots are gone, is so absurdly stupid and over the top. And then everything they have to do afterwards is so funny to me in terms of a movie situation. that I can't really agree to that. What you said there, though, made me think more of the first movie and then landing the plane at the end and all that, and just how kind of dull and by the numbers that felt.
Oh yeah,
in comparison to the actual excitement in the middle. So I think this was peaking parts of my dumb disaster movie logic at times in a way that the first one didn't quite do. Because as well, I appreciate the first one tried to build a lot more character, it spent far too much time doing it, and none of them ended up being that compelling in the end. Whereas this, I appreciate brisk. You remember some of these faces, so you know who's going to die if things go bad. And then let's get into what the actual meat of the movie is relatively quickly. It's still quite a long time by modern movie standards, but compared to the first Airport, a bit more brisk.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I get what you're saying, and I do agree that it is a lot more down that line of dumb disaster movie. But, no spoilers here. There's one point in this movie where the character who is trying to help take care of this plane after everything happened accidentally changes the frequency that they're broadcasting at. And so air traffic control just can't talk to them. And you think, oh, hell, that's going to be a big thing. And they just wrap it up. Immediately, it's just oh, hey, we found her. She's on this other station. And then they just continue on as if nothing happened. And that's the sort of thing where it didn't feel like it's ever a big deal. It doesn't feel like they're actually doing anything major here that's not immediately fixed.
I disagree. I can't say why until spoilers, but I disagree.
Right. Fair enough. And then the other thing, and this was just maybe, my own little personal thing, maybe it's just I wasn't fully giving it 100% of my attention. They open the movie with Charlton Heston being this pilot who he's dating Karen Black's character, who's Nancy, and she's concerned about the relationship. But the big thing that he's saying is that I can't go with you right now because I have to go meet up with these guys in this other town. And then a whole bunch of stuff happens where he's not able to fly out immediately. But then we get introduced to this completely separate other character who is also an older white man, who is also a pilot, who also needs to fly out to meet up with salespeople at a certain point. And all I could think is, this is the same character. Did I make a mistake? Was that not Charlton Heston? I could not tell the difference between these two. And what's worse is they never show up on screen at the same time. By the time one of them goes away, the other one comes back soon afterwards. So it just felt to me like they were blurring these two together, and it made the first half of this movie really confusing for me as to how it was all going to tie together.
I know what Charlton Heston looks like, so I never had that problem.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. I was like, is this, I'm trying to see, it's the other actor that I was mainly trying to be like, I don't think that's Charlton Heston. It doesn't look like him, but it's the same character.
If I have a critique, honestly, and I'm pretty sure I was paying attention here, is I didn't know until about halfway through the movie that Charlton Heston's character had anything to do with flying. I thought he was just a businessman who was flying to LA for a meeting and he had to go early before she did. It wasn't until halfway through the movie where they say, yeah, Get is the guy who trains the pilots for the 747s. And I'm like, oh, that's Heston's character. He's actually in the industry. Oh, okay. I guess that makes sense, but I didn't think he was.
I guess I would have, there must have been a line in that first conversation.
Because when he arrives at the start, he was not flying that plane. He was just a passenger on it. So I never for a second just assumed that he was a pilot of some kind. It never came up.
Like I said, I think there must have been a line that said something along the lines of he was a pilot, because I knew that going into it. I just assumed he was.
Either that or you're just remembering from a Skyjacked and you're thinking he's still the same character.
He literally just disembarked the plane from Skyjack, and then this movie began.
That's I think that's what's happened. Yes.
Yeah.
This is the weird thing. I'm not going to really defend a whole lot of things. It's not got the greatest characters in the world. It's not got a lot of but I think the bar is not that high for disaster movies. There's a couple of obviously notable ones that are actually genuinely quite good. But a lot of them fall into either they're going to be the fun schlock with some fun effects and some nice tense moments, and then you hope for the best with the rest of it. You hope for just a memorable cast. And I mean, obviously, is it boring? Is it not? You seem to think this was boring. Yeah. Honestly, I didn't. I was into it. I was having a good time. I think the pacing was a bit better than the first movie, even though I think the first movie is arguably better in a lot of like more traditional metrics, right? Not that pacing is not a traditional metric as it is, but in a lot of other metrics, I think Airport is technically, objectively the better movie. I think this one's a bit more entertaining because I would rather take a little bit of silly and better pacing over what the first one was. Yeah. Well, I didn't have a good time with the first one because the first one still had some good stuff in it, but this was a bit more fun for me.
I get what you're saying, and I do see that. I do see what you're saying here. But I think what I like most about the disaster movies is that, okay, we have a problem to solve, and then let's start working towards it. And then something just keeps on happening where we have to see the characters based off of what we know about them, based off what they're given, have to solve these problems. And it will result in there being, problems within the group dynamic. If it's an ensemble, it will result in like them having to make hard choices, but ultimately they end up making it through it. That's kind of what I liked about the first one is that they set up all of those problems and you get to see how they solve each one. Now, mind you, it was very slow, and I do agree with that. This is a lot better paced with that. But I think that the trade-off of it being sillier, while I do appreciate that in its own right, I don't think it quite makes up for the amount of we give up all of these problem-solving moments. I think it does something for the movie, but it doesn't make up for how much it lost in that transition.
This is a weird point to argue because I think you're kind of tied to one definition of how you think a disaster movie should work. And I think what this does is it operates on a different like wavelength. I think there's a different thing that it's trying to do in the back half, which I'll go into a bit more when we're into spoilers because I can't really say what it is because it talks about, how things are dealt with and whatnot. That's if there's anything you could spoil in this movie, it's that. Like, that's what you should not spoil. So, yeah. So we'll get into all that a bit later. Just to sort of dip into some of the usual stuff here. Cast, we mentioned Charlton Heston. He's obviously the star of the movie. He's the big name they got in to give it a bit of gravitas. They've got George Kennedy back, the one actor / character who's going to tie this franchise together.
Which it is notable that he's not working at the same airport anymore. He got a promotion at a different airport.
Do you know what? To be fair though, because you're able to see him for like a good while in the movie, and he gets like a big entrance where the camera's behind him, and he's walking towards a plane in the hangar, and you're like, oh, this is him. This is his big like walking out of the movie moment. And I thought, oh, they're just going to pretend that it's the same character, but he's randomly at an airport in Washington now. However, the promotion to like vice president of like airline operations does sound like it might move you to like more of a headquarters airport, so fair enough.
I couldn't tell whether or not he was linked to the airport specifically or if he's still with the airline, because they said like, oh, you're flying Columbia Air or something. I think that's the name of the... I couldn't tell if he's tied to the airport or the airline this time around.
Is that a real airline? I don't recognize it.
No, I doubt it. I doubt any airline's going to lend an actual name to this.
True. That said, though, I think Boeing were still involved with this a little bit, because there was one line where a kid goes, the 747 is the safest plane ever built, Mom.
Oh my God. They did that like 4 times in this movie where they're just like, oh, they say anybody can land a 747. And it's like, oh, really? Tell me more about your advertising pitch there, Boeing. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, don't tell me that you don't need a pilot, because it just makes me think you're looking for excuses before anything goes wrong.
And that's the other thing, like, it's not neither here nor there. I'm not doing this as a positive or a negative, but just for Boeing sucking itself off here is when things start going wrong, they flick like 3 switches and then like everything's smooth sailing. And it's only because of this very specific location they're at that anything has to be done immediately. Otherwise, the Boeing is totally safe and would have been able to land perfectly.
Yeah. So we got him. You mentioned Karen Black, who is the main flight attendant and Charlton Heston's love interest. I would argue she's the main character out of everyone here. You know, she's not the star, but she is the main character. We have a couple of pilots, as you will, a couple other flight attendants who, they're more or less defined just by kind of their personality, if nothing else. And we have a nun, we have Linda Blair, who is a sick child who's going to LA for a kidney transplant, just to give us more stakes.
Right.
Like, she has to get there in time. She might not make it if we don't get there. Never mind anything happened to the plane. She has to arrive on time.
That's the thing. Like, if they used her as the ticking clock of we need to have this saved within like an hour or something like that, I'd be like, okay, that works, cool. But it doesn't. She's just there. She's just around.
Yeah, every so often the camera goes over to her and she's just endlessly positive, and it's like, okay, it's nice you're happy after the whole demon thing, but I mean, you know, and then just so we've already got someone that Charlton Heston cares about on the plane, and Nancy, right, the main character. We've got the sick child who needs the kidney transplant, as well as just other characters who might, you know, be sympathetic. But just to cap it all off, we have to make sure Petroni, George Kennedy's character, that he cares about someone on the plane. So all of a sudden, it's like, oh, his wife and son are on the plane. Oh, I guess, okay. All right, so he's invested.
Yeah. I mean, you would think the vice president would be invested in the plane not crashing all the time, but sure, let's add in the wife and kid on there too.
Does that mean the next movie he's going to have like his second cousin on the plane? Because we can't have the wife and the son be the victims again.
I mean, you say that, but Die Hard to Die Hard 2, we had the wife in peril both times. So not only are we going to have the wife and kid, we're also going to throw in the dog.
All right.
That being said, I do think that having the wife on the plane resulted in the best performance from Petroni here. Like, out of anyone in the movie, I think he gave one of the best performances here.
Jerry Stiller's one of three older... I mean, he's not even that old, because obviously he's younger here than I'm used to seeing him in anything else.
Right.
But he still feels pretty middle-aged, and he's with some other guys who are just, like, drinking and getting drunk. And, I mean, not to spoil anything, but his entire thing for this movie is that he sleeps through the entire thing once he's on the plane.
It's so disappointing, because you see him there and you're like, okay, we're going to get some comedy beats. And then it's just the two other guys around him, and he's just sleeping.
I want him to yell. I want him to get upset and yell about the plane.
Yeah. He needs to be his character from Seinfeld.
Yes.
Like, that's what I'm looking for. Just worth also mentioning here, Eric Estrada, who is, of course, notable for a lot of B movies he did, is Julio, one of the co-pilots or, like, backup pilots or something like that.
Yeah, I've got thoughts on him.
Okay. We have... the singing nun, Sister Ruth, is played by Helen Reddy, who was a singer in her own right, and she's kind of just a celebrity guest star here.
Okay. Like, I can't say I knew her from anything.
Nah, she made a lot of, like, 60s, 70s sort of vibe music.
I just laughed because, again, we had nuns on the plane. That's two movies in a row we've had nuns on the plane.
I have a feeling we're going to continue to have nuns on planes.
They can't have three in a row with nuns on the plane.
There's
not that many nuns.
And then finally there is the actress character, as you said, is Gloria Swanson playing Gloria Swanson. She's literally just a more made up version of herself.
Yeah. There's also like a slightly older woman who the running gag with her is that she's like drinking hard booze. And then there's like a guy who keeps talking to her who's just kind of nice.
Okay. I could not figure out this relationship here between this dude whose only bit is he starred in the in-flight movie. And then the moment that wraps up in the plot, his entire bit of a character is he just kind of is wanting to be friends with this older woman. And he's like, it seemed like they had a relationship before this, but for the life of me, I couldn't place it.
No, I don't think so. I think he was just, this was who he started talking to, and he just kept talking to her.
It's because every single time he leaned over and said, like, I forget her last name, but like, oh, it's Devaney. That's it. It says Mrs. Devaney. He always called her that way. And it just felt like it was trying to get a like sign of respect sort of thing. Like she was his boss.
No, I think that's just what he was. Honestly, the whole in-flight movie thing threw me because you see them. That's obviously this is back in the days before everyone had their own little screen to just pick a movie. Where like something was projected. And, we saw this in Die Hard 2 as well, actually, because they were watching The Simpsons in Die Hard 2. Yeah. What stuck out to me about this, though, is that the movie they were watching was the full 2.39 to 1 widescreen. And I'm like, did planes actually project the like movies in like the theatrical aspect ratio? That feels like weird. It feels to me like that's something they did in the movie because whatever footage they had was in that ratio, and it was just easier to just do it in the right ratio than mess around with it. But I don't know if they were projecting it anyway. I feel like planes aren't wide enough for that ratio.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be scaled down and all that, but I think it would be the easiest thing for planes to literally just pick up a film reel from a theater.
I guess.
I can't imagine it would be any different.
Honestly, this was quite a fancy plane because it had like a spiral staircase going up to the cockpit, so it had like an extra deck effectively.
Well, you say that. That's probably just standard for the 747, the greatest plane to ever be made.
Well, no, because I saw that and I went, wait, is this just like a movie thing, or are there actually planes of this size that have like a staircase? Because sometimes you get the fancy double-decker trains where there's like a staircase going up. I mean, I've only ever really seen it in Under Siege 2 Dark Territory, which I'm sure we'll do in the channel someday. But I was like, is this a thing with planes? And I googled it, and yeah, sure enough, starting in 2007, there's at least one or two types of plane where there's an entire 2 decks of passengers, and there's like stairs going up and down between them. And the photos are kind of wild. It looks like the stairs looks like the foyer you get in the middle of like a mansion foyer, just in the middle of the plane going up to the second deck. And I'm like, all right, it's a big ass heavy plane with that many people on it.
Weird. I did also take a look here that the 747, that staircase was specifically to lead from the passenger area up to the pilot's area.
Yes.
So
I eventually figured out that's where they were going when they were going to the cockpit. But even that's kind of weird that the cockpit's like above so the passengers are going all the way up to the front of the plane and the cockpit's above them. That is still unique in its own way. Yeah.
Nobody designs them like Boeing.
Hey, at least all my security concerns that were driving me mad in the last one weren't really a factor here, because the whole plot has nothing to do with anyone going through security. It's all just an accident in the air, so it's whatever. But
that being said, we do get an opening in this movie of a woman going all the way outside, all the way to the gate, with zero interaction with security. Yeah, so
it's a wonder where the camera behind her as the titles are playing, and she goes all the way up to where the terminal where the plane's coming in, and I'm like, yep, that's not a thing anymore. Yep. Not at all.
I'd love the 2-hour-long wonder of the modern day where you have to sit and wait in the TSA line.
That'd be the whole movie. That would basically be a Seinfeld episode. That'd be like, hey, we're going to do Seinfeld the movie, and it's just the process of them going into the airport and getting to the gate. That process in one single take.
Yeah.
And just bickering throughout. Oh dear. So also randomly, I was curious how fast a typical airline jet goes. 570 miles per hour once it's at cruising altitude, just in case you're curious.
Okay. I mean, once something goes that fast, I have no frame of reference for it, but...
Well, I mean, sure. they wouldn't put it in miles per hour. It's translated to that so I could understand it in my feeble, land terms. But they talk about Mach, whatever.
Mach 7, Mach whatever.
But, 570 miles per hour. But compare that to a car when you're, like even on the highway, you're only doing 60 or 70. So.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is I make regular trips out to Pittsburgh, and that's about 400-ish miles away. So that takes me 4 hours to get there. I can only assume being able to do it in 45 minutes would be about the translation there.
Yeah, because they talked about speeds a lot in this, and keeping like a good speed, otherwise you'll stall the plane and all that. And I was like, I was curious, what like obviously this isn't full speed. What is full speed if they're at like the 30,000 feet kind of thing? And
now is that modern planes or is that planes back in the 70s? Because I can only assume we've learned to go faster.
Well, it's modern planes. I don't know if the standard passenger jets changed that much since the 70s in terms of speed, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. Airplane speeds in the 70s. Cruising speeds around 300 miles per hour.
Well, a bit slower.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
The first jets were about 420. I don't know if this counts as a jet, but sure.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I mean, there's faster planes. I mean, in fact, the fourth airport movie is called Concorde, and Concordes were faster. That was the whole thing with Concorde. So I know there's faster in what's in this, and even what regular jets fly today. But like we're not watching a movie about fancy like Top Gun Maverick jets.
Yeah. I mean, literally, there's another plane that's introduced to this early on, and it's like a rinky-dink little propeller biplane sort of thing. Like, it's nowhere near as complicated as the jets we would later on get.
Yeah. So Yeah, I mean that's pretty much it in terms of characters. A lot of them probably aren't going to come up that much, to be honest, outside of the odd little thing. The movie's pretty focused on the main characters dealing with the issue and the problems, as opposed to the passengers. The passengers are there for a bit of color. They're there for a bit of, peppering in. Here's who we're trying to save, and then move on from
Honestly,
there.
I feel like most of their points were just to make a funny little bit. Like, even the more serious characters, it felt like it was just kind of cutting over to them. They'd say a one-liner and then cut over to whatever's going on in the rest of the plot.
Yeah. So other than that, I mean, I don't know. I suppose something we should mention is that how did you feel about the actual imagery of the plane in this one? Like miniatures wise, real aerial shots, because there was definitely some real aerial shots in this.
Yeah, I think that the actual aerial shots were fantastic. I think they did a great job of that. Every once in a while, you could see like smudge marks and little blemishes that were on the helicopter wing. Yeah. But beyond that, it looked fantastic. My biggest critique is the rear projection they used to show what's outside the cockpit. Because anytime they needed to show something that was not just the landscape, it looked bad. It looked really bad.
Yeah, it was pretty obvious. By and large, though, quite good. I don't think there was any awkward miniature moments like that moment in the first movie where it's coming out of the clouds, where it felt like, oh, this is a really dodgy miniature kind of shot. And I'm sure there's some miniatures in this, obviously, but none of them stuck out like a sore thumb like that one did.
Right.
The rear screen projection was by far the thing that stood out the most. But yeah, it's okay. Like I say, there's definitely more stuff in this. There's a couple of like fighter jets. There's a helicopter at one point. There's a lot of more crafts in this movie.
Yes.
So I feel like that's where the money was really spent, other than maybe Heston's paycheck, was all the vehicles they were getting to use. Whether that was via the effects work or in a lot of cases just actually getting some footage of these real vehicles going around. So. Nah, that stuff was cool. I can't say music stuck out to me particularly. Just sort of pretty typical thriller, stuff.
I mean, it was that, and then it was that, like I said, that singing nun. She had her own little acoustic guitar song.
Yeah, but that's separate. I'm talking about score. I'm not talking about diegetic singing.
Yeah, I'm just saying that guitar song, from the plot of the movie, it makes enough sense. From having it in the movie at all, it just kind of sticks out, especially once everything's said and done.
Yeah. Do you know why you have a nun? It's not even because you feel more sympathy because a nun's more innocent. It's because when you cut to them praying, shit's going down.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, see, if you want to show me that shit's going down, show the nun drinking like a sailor. That will tell me that this is a hopeless situation.
Just stands up and screams, I need to bang someone before we all die. Someone come to the bathroom with me.
Oh, there's also a couple. I don't think they even say a single word, but they just focus on them randomly in the back half of just these two random people, a random couple that just is making out like a lot or getting really googly eyed at each other.
Oh yeah, it's like a younger couple. Yeah. They're probably newlyweds or something, just based on the demeanor of their traveling. That's pretty much it character wise. Also, one of the big things I complained about in the last movie was every time it cut to anyone near traffic control and they were falling asleep as they were reading out of a textbook. What's so funny is that there's a lot less of that in this, just in general. And the one guy they do cut to, the first time we see someone near traffic control, and he kind of pops up throughout the movie after that point, is they kind of did something I respect here, where he felt like he was following what you wanted, and he was being very serious. He wasn't letting the emotions get the better of him, but he felt more stone cold. It felt more like he's locked in like a machine and like not letting the emotions get to him, which I think worked better than I'm falling asleep as I read from this textbook about 5, 7, 9 or blah blah blah. Right?
Yeah, I wasn't sure how you would take that. I wasn't sure because I agree. It is more of what I like. I think them forcing out the emotion, but I agree that there is this subtle, naive little thing of they're showing you that they are trying to stay locked in rather than just it coming naturally.
Yes. So that was better in that respect. And also they didn't like, cut to him a million times in a little circle in the middle of the screen, which also helped, I think.
Yeah, they didn't do any of those fancy little tricks in this one.
No.
The other thing I think that really helped with the air traffic control stuff is, I won't say who, but they do hand off the instruction part to a different character who is not air traffic control. So it allows them to get a little bit more of that energy in there when it needs to happen.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So I think we're more or less ready to get into spoilers. I think the back half of this movie is fairly fun. I think if you like this type of disaster movie, I think there's something to enjoy here without it ever being high art, right? Like, I think this is like a 25% or something on Rotten Tomatoes. I think that feels a bit harsh to me. That feels like, whoa, what is this? Like, Joker 2? Come on now. Like, that's not go nuts here.
Yeah, I mean, I can see where you're coming from. I do think there is an audience for this, but for me personally, it just felt like the entire back half of this, nothing lived up to how insane the inciting incident was. I think that was the peak, and from there it was all down.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Look, this isn't like when you were shitting all over Bound, and I'm like, what are you talking about, you madman? This is a great movie. This isn't that. I'm not going to sit here and be confused at why it didn't click for you, because ultimately it's not that great. It's just, it's working. It's hitting the right notes that I needed to hit for this type of movie and no more. I'm not surprised if anyone doesn't like this, right? So take that muted recommendation as it is.
It gets a solid, sure, from Pete.
Well, not more than that. I mean, I liked it, but I think it's an acquired taste. I think this is more, you need to like this kind of thing. And, I do like disaster movies, typically. So this is hitting some of the notes that I want from it. So what I'm saying is this isn't you being delusional like you have been in some other episodes is what I'm getting at.
Good. Because I 100% cannot wait until the next extra reels where I'm just going to say this is the greatest thing to ever be made. Just to continue on that path of delusionalness, because I can't go off brand for that long.
You realize the next one we're recording is an Uwe Boll movie, right?
I know what I said.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, we'll see if we can keep that lie going. Very good. All right. Spoilers for Airport 1975. You have been warned. So, I was a little bit worried at the start of the movie because when they were doing the relationship talk, when like Charlton Heston gets off the flight and she's like, "Hey, we need to talk right now." And he's like, "Hey, I need to get going and make that flight so that I can be in LA for this meeting. And you get in at the Red Eye tonight. We can spend the night together and we can have whatever talk then." And I thought, oh god, don't. I thought she was going to say she was pregnant because it sounded like an I'm pregnant conversation. Luckily, Absolutely. It wasn't. It seems to be more, we've been dating for 6 years and you've still not proposed. When is that coming? That's what it actually seemed to be as the movie went on. But I really thought we were doing a pregnant woman again.
Yeah, it's definitely a commitment thing because she phrases it in the way of like, oh, well, this thing that we've got, maybe I'm just sick of some one night stands. And then she just kind of storms off. So it's definitely a thing where she's not waiting around. It's not even a marriage. It's just more of a, can we just put a label on this already and say that we're a thing?
Yeah, clearly this has been like a pilot and a flight attendant who have been casually together for 6 years, and she's like, "Hey, can we finally, maybe go steady?" Feels like it's time, Charlton.
I mean, 6 years, yeah, I'd say probably.
Because he actually says, whoa, what's the rush all of a sudden? She's like, it's been 6 years.
This is just the earliest gaslighting. This is just the thing of like, okay, well, look, if you want to rush into marriage, so be it. But I, however, want to wait.
What's the rush, honey? You're turning 55 next year.
That's a good point. How big is the age difference here? Is it something to be concerned about?
I don't think so. I mean, there's definitely an age gap, but she's definitely not like that young.
Yeah, it's 16 years age gap.
Yeah, but she's like at least in her 30s by this point, right?
75 minus 39. Whatever that would be.
Yeah, 36.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
No.
Anyway, so we can put the
The pitchforks down.
The pitchforks, yeah. I was trying to think of a funny like word before police back in the station, but I couldn't think of a funny word.
Yeah.
That wouldn't get us muted off YouTube anyway. Anyway, so this like sets up this relationship, and then we just basically proceed to get introduced to a bunch of characters who are going to get on the main plane that we're going to focus on. Most notable, though, we get interested in the pilots, and I want to talk about the third one, right? So the Hispanic guy.
Yes, Eric Estrada.
Because the thing that stood out to me most in the first 20 or so minutes of this movie is how horny a lot of these characters that work on the plane are, but him especially was coming across as like lawsuit after lawsuit, the sexual harassment this man is facing if he doesn't die, which he obviously does, but if he didn't...
I was dealing with it throughout the first half of this movie. I was like, okay, 70s, people are horny, a lot of cocaine, fine, whatever. But then there's one point when he's sitting in the cockpit and I think it's Kathy goes to get or Nancy is her character's name, goes to get them all like some drinks, and they switch him up and he says, oh, I ordered mine with sugar. And then he says, and I quote, I like mine sweet, mommy. And I had to draw a line somewhere, and it was the word mommy.
I mean, his introduction, the first time we hear him even speak, is that we're introduced to, I don't know if it's Nancy in the scene, but the younger blonde flight attendants there talking to another flight attendant.
Who they explicitly say is a teenager. Like, actually, she says she's emancipated, so it's not even like 18, it's like 16.
Yes. And the blonde says, oh, what's the flight crew like tonight? So even she's kind of horny because she's like, hey, what are the guys looking like on this flight?
It's like, oh, are they sexy tonight?
Right. And then he pipes in from behind because he's behind them on the escalator and says something dirty or, vaguely innuendo.
He's just like nodding to the guy next to him being like, check out these goods. And they're like,
that's what
all right.
Check out these goods. Yes. And then the other flight attendant says, hey, this one's married, keep in mind. And later on, the blonde teenager, like when they're on the plane at the coffee place, after he said something else kind of flirty or inappropriate, and honestly, every time he says something, it is just kind of pervy and sleazy. It really, it never feels like charming. It's always a little bit like, no, you're a creep. You're actually just a creep. But she actually at one point says, so is he really married? As if she's interested. And it's like, well, his wife and son think he is, so yes. He is.
I will give it credit that those little like cutaway one-liners, like the things that wrap up the scenes with the one-liners, those are all written well. I don't think there's any that really fall flat. I think that they do a good job of keeping the humor up in these scenes.
Yeah, I think though at the time this character was written in a way that they thought the audience will like him because he's kind of sly and But I think a modern audience hear this guy speak and goes, no, this guy's should be sued. Yeah.
Can we get a Me Too movement against Eric Estrada going on here? I'm just curious.
And because the co-pilot's not like the co-pilot's kind of sexist as well. Like, the way he's talking is they're on because he's with his introductions with the captain, and they're going up the escalator, and he's basically saying he's like, oh yes, I don't want it to be a lonely night. I know you're a married man, and you're you keep to yourself, but and later on because part of the plot of the movie once they're in the air for a bit is that the weather's getting bad. There's like a lot of fog or something in California, so they have to like do a I don't know if you call it emergency landing, but a detour landing to Salt Lake City just to rest for a bit till the weather calms down. And when they say that and they realize they're probably going to be there overnight, and they say, hey, the captain says to the other two, are you two going to be all right for the night? And Estrada pulls out his little black book and starts fingering through it like, what ladies do I know in Salt Lake City? I cannot wait, because I know all the pilots are toast. Based on the premise. I knew that going in, so I'm like, I cannot wait until you all snuff it. You're insufferable.
I managed to dodge that. I didn't find out what the actual disaster was going to be, so this entire time I'm sitting here like, boy, I have a feeling that this guy is not long for this world just because he's made insufferable. I didn't know he was gone, but he had that vibe.
Well, it's funny, because I was thinking whether or not you'd be confused is because you get introduced to Charlton Heston, and then you meet these pilots, and they feel like kind of like secondary characters. Like, that's a weird move. But obviously, I know that's because the premise of this movie is they all die early, and that's the crisis. Yeah.
I mean, I assumed that before anything happened, my assumption was something's going to happen to this plane that results in Charlton Heston having to be the pilot that comes in and like either flies the plane to go save it or advises how to fly the plane to someone else. Like, he's going to use his knowledge somehow. And I was basically right, all things considered.
Sure. So yeah, we get, like, you know, the interest to all the characters. Honestly, when we did the character descriptions, that was basically everything we had to say for most of them. There's not really much to add for the majority of them. Other than when Linda Blair is introduced, they have like a forklift to get her up to the plane because she's in a wheelchair.
I want to go back even to the beginning of her plot, because we get this bit where there's like an airport hospitality guy or someone who's like in charge of that. He's on the phone with someone at the hospital who's just giving all of the exposition for Linda Blair. He's just like, well, remember, she needs to land super quickly because she can't stay off her kidney machine for that long. This guy, I don't know why they decided to make this character as unlikable as humanly possible for like a doctor who's saying we have to save this girl, because he's just constantly talking over this other guy, just like, yeah, right, whatever, okay, fine, just make sure you do it. Like, it's such a weird choice.
Yeah, but other than that, she has a guitar with her for some reason. I mean, I guess it's so that none can sing with it later, but like, you know, and but before we got to that, I was like, why does she have a guitar? She's hugging this thing like a teddy bear.
That's the other part that, if you want to talk about confusion in this plot, that's the part that got me, was because the camera focuses on the inside of this guitar numerous times.
Like there's something secret in there that's going to save them all.
I'm thinking there's a bomb. I'm thinking there's a bomb inside this guitar, because the last movie was a bomb. I'm thinking that this one is just, okay, sequel. Now it's another bomb.
Oh, dear. Actually, this is just a pet peeve, but as someone who used to play guitar in like high school thereabouts for a number of years, when the nun just says, hey, can I try the guitar, or I think she says, hey, can you play if you play guitar? And she's like, yeah, sure. She just picks it up and starts playing, and I'm like, no, you have to tune it. It's not going to be in tune. She's been holding that thing for like hours at this point.
There's a point where they say we have to stow it away, and you hear it go bong as someone knocks it against something.
So yeah, that's not just this movie. Every movie with a guitar is guilty of that. They never tune the damn things. They're all just magically in tune.
Well, you see, this little girl has literally nothing better to do. They just decided not to show her sitting there tuning it for 20 minutes straight as she's laying there on her back.
She's such an optimist as well. She's like, oh, Mom, all the people in the plane are just so interesting. Can we meet them all? I'm like, what?
I could think of maybe 3 interesting people that would be appropriate for a kid your age, and one of them is talking to you now, so...
I mean, sure, I get, okay, sick kid, maybe like, oh, the pilot will come out and say hello and be nice to her. I could see that being a thing, but going up to like random passenger in seat 7C and say, hey, my daughter wants to meet you, and I'm like, why? I'm an accountant from like I don't know, Delaware.
Yeah, whatever.
Why'd you want to talk to me? I'm boring.
There was one other child character that we already hinted at, was the child of Petroni, and he's given his own character thing where...
Rod, you say character thing. Really what it is that the running gag is that his mum just needs to like take an aspirin and maybe drink booze because he's such a handful, because his enthusiasm for everything he cares about is so turned up high that she's sick of doing tours in Washington with him because he wanted to see every single like monument, every single museum, whatever it is. And like that's it, that's the running gag. And he's like, at one point when they say they're landing in Salt Lake City, she goes, oh, I bet you want to see this tourist thing in
the Mormon temple.
Like, yeah, I've never heard of it, but in Salt Lake City. And he's like, yeah, what? That's a great idea, Mom. And she just goes, why did I open my mouth? I'm such a effing idiot.
Well, see, but that's the thing I thought was weird, was that it's made out that this kid is like either really eager or actually like really, really, really smart. And they were saying how he was playing some game and like was winning constantly. So I couldn't tell if that was him being like a hyper intelligent kid or if it was just he's just wanting to win against his mom in this card game.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we're really getting at here is that all these characters have quirks to make them memorable, but none of it is about giving them a story, an arc, or anything like that.
I mean, last movie we specifically mentioned there were soldiers on board, there were doctors on board, things that actually related to things having to do with the plane. This is 100%. The plane's going down. Nobody here knows anything about it, so we'll just cut back to see you guys freaking out every once in a while.
So, anyway, so the big thing that gets the movie going, though, right, once they're in the air, is that there's this other random guy who flies his own little plane, who needs to also fly across country for something. He's coming home to his wife after a meeting or something. It was the same
thing. This is the guy I got confused with Charlton Heston, because he's also going to meet with like a sales thing or a board of directors or something, and it needs to happen now or else he's going to miss out on something.
Yeah, but he's not Charlton Heston, so I don't know why you had this problem.
They're both old white guys. What do you want from me?
Because they don't look alike.
Here's the thing with all of the characters, everyone on the plane is so diverse. Everyone is so different. I was just confused as to why these two have almost identical backstories going on.
But
I'm not that upset about it. I was just a little bit confused.
Thing to be confused by. It's like, oh, I went to see a movie with, like, you know, Arnie in it, and I got really confused because there was another muscly Austrian man at one point, even though the other guy's the one that I've recognized in like dozens of movies already.
Dude, I have no idea what happened in Expendables. There was one guy running around doing the work of like 12.
Well, that's John Wick.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. To be fair, I don't think I could confuse Keanu for anybody.
I don't know. You get, especially with the way he looks now, get someone in a beard with a long hair. You know?
Yeah, but nobody else is cast in those sort of movies that looks like him. I'd have to go back to like Point Break to be able to find someone that's even kind of similar.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so yes, this guy is flying around. He also hears the news that it's too dangerous to fly on the West Coast. You have to land, and he's like, "Oh, Salt Lake City's free. Cool, I'll go land there." And I actually, as much as I knew that he was going to crash into the plane, I knew that was the premise. I didn't know like why or how. So I was thinking, oh, is this going to be like some cock up in the air traffic control where they tell him to move in at the wrong time or something? You know, something like that. It ends up not being anyone's cock up. He just has a heart attack while he's flying the plane.
Yeah, there's this thing where he starts getting like really impatient. He's like, "What's the holdup down there?" And they're like, "Oh, you're still number 2 behind the plane." And my brain was going, "Oh, he's going to be impatient and he's going to try to land first, and it's going to like cause the collision." And then all of a sudden he grabs his chest and slouches over. I'm like, "Oh, never mind. This is far worse."
Yeah, but at least you don't hate him for it because it's not his fault.
Yeah.
He's just
absolutely.
You know, but this is why it's clear why you always have like a second pilot because in case this happens.
I mean, I gotta say, I get that they were both like kind of in the landing position, so they were in around the same airspace. But to be able to have a heart attack and yet somehow hit someone in the wild blue yonder that is the sky. Like, that's God stepping in and saying this needed to happen.
I mean, that's the big, not contrivance necessarily, but that's just the thing you have to accept, that it's the one in the 1,000 like shot that he hits the plane when he could have just fallen out the sky. But you know, like that's what it is. I'm
not holding it against the movie.
But yeah, he hits the top of the cockpit. Big hole is made. I laughed. One, obviously, the rear screen projection of the plane coming towards the cockpit's pretty rough. But the bit that made me laugh, though, is the way the co-pilot just gets like sort of lifted up out the cockpit.
It's like an obvious dummy, and it's just yeet right out the top.
Yeah, I think because I was getting me is that other than him going out, which I guess you could say it was this, although I'm not sure if it looked like that. Is that I felt like the whole idea of like stuff being sucked out because of the pressure. It didn't feel like that was really happening outside of him.
Yes. However, they did explicitly say that they were at a much lower altitude.
Well, they did, and that's why the breathing's not an issue. But I'm fairly certain the cabin pressure would still be a thing, though, would it not?
Yeah, well, the cabin pressure would be a thing, but it would equalize faster. So, like, the people at the front, immediately next to the hole, would be in trouble, but everyone else would be, like, super quickly fixed, you know?
Well, because the thing is, as soon as this happens and Nancy goes up there first and like sees the destruction, right? So Estrada's down and dead. The captain is still alive, but he's like really out of it and also kind of blind from what's just happened. So he has just enough in him to like turn the autopilot on so they don't immediately plummet to their death. And then he's like, okay, take me out of here, please. But I thought she was standing there and I'm like, she should be colder than she is, because there's a big hole like, right there. And don't get me wrong, as the movie goes on, they start handing out blankets and they're all wearing jackets and whatnot, because clearly, yes, they'd be cold. And of course, they were getting ready to land soon, which is why they're, not too high up, that it's not that much of an instant issue. But I was thinking, like the way she's standing there in like her blouse, like just blowing in the wind as she's like on the headset for the first time, I thought, you must be freezing.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. My issue that I was coming across with, not even the freezing, I did consider that, but my thing is that they're wearing these itty bitty little headphones, like customer service style headphones, and there is the entire force of 500-mile-per-hour winds right next to them. I don't think they could hear a goddamn thing, and if they could, that microphone ain't picking up a goddamn thing.
That's true. The quality of that headset is better than anything we have today based on this scenario. Speaking of headphones, actually, when they were watching the in-flight movie, I loved that the headphones that they're all using to watch a movie in 1975 are basically the same as like a stethoscope, like headphones.
Yeah, it just felt like this is how the 70s durable, like, proofed their stuff to make sure that nobody was going to take them with, nobody was going to be able to damage them on the plane. They just coated them in a thick thing of rubber and let it right up to their ears. Yeah,
just that. Headphones are one of those things where if you go back like to before like the 90s or even the 80s, like you just instantly there's this big change in what they look like and like how they function. I think there's a bit of crossover because the 80s the Walkman started being a thing, so there was something more recognizable as modern headphones starting to kind of filter in. But yeah, weird transition for sure. So yeah, this is where the movie really kicks off, though, right? This is the inciting big thing is starting to happen.
Yes.
Now we have the head flight attendant is the one who is like dealing with the plane, and I think honestly the thing that was most surprising to me is how quickly like the others just kind of like let the passengers know, oh yeah, the pilots are all dead, and now the flight attendant's like dealing with the plane, and I'm like, why are you telling them this? Why are you telling them this? You fools!
I mean, I understand it from the viewpoint of like, look, it's better to just rip off the Band-Aid quickly rather than being caught out in a lie later on. But I feel like this is absolutely something where you should be able to slowly break the news.
Yeah, you like, stall this for a bit.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, look, we had a little bit of an issue up front. As you see, we carted away one of the pilots, but we are getting it under control. And then just slowly drip feed information as needed.
Don't get me wrong. There is a moment later that's quite nice because they all know, which is there's a moment where they all cheer for her. Where, like, see when I think it's when the either the pilots arrived in the plane or just before, she comes down and makes an announcement, and they all sort of give her a big sort of round of applause because she's kind of held it down until this point. Yeah. And I thought that's actually quite nice for her. She has been through hell sitting in that chair, terrified that she's going to kill everyone.
I agree. I think it's a nice little moment. However, just to stay in that moment, the very next thing she says is, because of other stuff we'll get to, she's like, the current pilot needs you to be aware, though, that we do need to turn off one of the engines because it's a little bit damaged. And immediately the mood shifts and you hear a character say, we're all going to die. And I'm like, damn, what a fickle crowd.
Dear. Anyway, so yeah, she quickly gets on the headset and starts like, in the air traffic controls, like asking like, hey, flight 409 or whatever the number is, or something like that. What's going on? Report, come in, blah, blah. And so she starts talking to him, explains the damage, and they get her sitting down and like, hey, like, is the autopilot on? Is this, look at this switch, is it flipped where and I'll be honest, this confused me a little bit because they kept saying, is it on the manual bit? And she said, yeah, that means it's turned on. And I'm like, wait, manual means autopilot's turned on? That's really confusing, but I'll take your word for it, movie.
Yeah.
I'll take your word for it.
I didn't even think about that, but yeah, you're right.
But like, so it gets going, right? And obviously quite quickly, George Kennedy becomes aware of the situation on the ground. And he's like, get Charlton Heston. He's been training the 747 pilots. There's no one better than someone else to, like, he trains the pilots. So if anyone can talk someone through what to do, it's the guy who trains the pilots to do it.
But to be clear, the 747 can be landed by a monkey. It is that advanced.
So says the kid.
So says everybody in the... They get off the end. It's like, wow, that was a great... I forget what he said. I think he's called it like a pussycat or something like that. And then Petroni's just like, nah, that's a bobcat. And it's like, yeah, okay, it's just a plane, guy.
I mean, he clearly likes planes, though. He's like really unhealthily into planes.
But I feel like if he looked in the direction of whoever Boeing's rival is, he'd be like, and that is a piece of shit, and I hate it.
So, yeah, it's not too long, obviously, before Heston gets the call, reacts, runs out to go and help, and before long, him and George Kennedy are in a little plane flying to, not the plane in the sky, but to like the nearby airport to like sort of like run command.
To where they're landing.
Yeah, figure out and all that. And he actually gives her a lot of instructions from that plane. He talks her through things while he's flying the little plane. So here's what I think was quite smart about this, because there was a point during this next like chunk of the movie, right, where for the third time he's talking her through either making a turn or ascending a little bit, and there's like, hey, check this number, check your altitude, check your speed, check your balance. Well, he's going through all these different things, and every time they're doing any of these moves, he has her check every single one. And the third time or thereabouts where we're going through this, I had a thought to myself where I went, this is getting a bit dull now, movie. You've had him like ask for these specific things. Like, we can just assume he's doing it now, or he's getting her to do it now, right? Yeah. However, I actually think it's smart in hindsight. And the reason why I think it's smart, because it's just on that brink of being too many times where it starts to be really boring to hear this, like, I don't call it technical talk, but like just the nitty gritty of what's happening with the controls, is because it all builds up to a big pivotal moment later on in the movie where the communications are completely cut off. And she can even just tell visually, because of where they are and they're surrounded by mountains, that the mountain that's in front of them, they're not high enough. And she's not got anyone to talk her through it, and she has to lift the plane up on her own with no guidance. And this is the moment where I went, you know what, movie? You had them repeat all these things so many times that I actually believe that she has taken enough of that in, that she has a chance of doing this. Because she audibly says, they kept making me check the speed, because if, we drop too low, then it'll, stall the plane, it'll be a bad thing. So she's picked up enough from all those previous instructions to try and do it on her own. And I actually think this is, I mean, not to spoil my scene of the movie, I think this is the moment of the movie, is her pulling this off on her own. I think this is what everything was building up to, pretty much. From all of her, like, various attempts where, he's talking, because the first time she's even just, like, turning the plane around, because they're like, hey, we have to get you to circle, or, like, do a 180 turn every once in a while, so you're flying around, the airport you're meant to eventually land at. So it's like, hey, like, the autopilot's not turning the plane, I'm going to have to talk you through it manually. And she's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And she, she pauses and she's like, I can't do this. And he's like, honey, seriously, you can. It just, all you have to do is just tilt to the left a little bit and watch the meter, and just keep it like, from going under the line, and do it slowly and watch your speed. He's talking her through, check this, check that, and she pulls it off, and it's a nice little scene on its own. The first time, and you've got George Kennedy listening to it as well and saying things occasionally like, oh, she's too low, or she's ascending, so she's slowing down, she has to keep her speed up, and it's sort of teaching you some of the little rules of flying. Now, how accurate all these are for real flying, I don't know, I don't care, but in the logic of the movie, like, it sets up for her later. I
agree with the first part. I agree that doing the nitty gritty, getting her to understand what is needed, and then having her repeat it later on, of saying, okay, here's why I can't do this, because they taught me that we might stall out. I agree. I agree with all that. I think it's a good way to bring it back. My issue comes in with, you are glossing over one specific part that I think takes away from that final moment. And that is, the pilot who was blinded has been kept awake in the back so that he can help as needed. And in this moment where she's saying, like, we're going to hit those mountains, we got to do something, They go back to him and get instructions from him on what to do. And I don't feel that that's her using all the knowledge that she's picked up to be able to dodge the mountains. I think that's getting instructions from him.
Did you even listen to what he said? He barely formed a sentence.
He said, pull back the set the thrust like a few inches or whatever like that. It's to get the engine so they don't stall out and all that. I don't think it's her. That's the thing. It's like 40% her realizing that something needs to be done, but she doesn't have the knowledge at this point to know what to do.
Oh, I think your percentage is way off here. Like, he gives one detail that he can mutter out before he incoherently goes back into kind of a zombified state. He's barely forming any words. Like, everything about her, watching like her readings and keeping the speed right, all those things she's learned throughout the movie, she still has to do on her own. The pilot who's barely awake back in the waiting room, he's told her barely anything.
I get what you're saying, but then they make a conscious decision that they are going to do a cut of him saying, you need to pull back the thrust, or whatever this like barely mutterings he made out is. But what he generally said was, for the plane not to stall out, you need to get the thrust up, and you need to pull, he says like 3 inches or 1 inch or something like that. And then the very next cut is them doing that, and then her flying the plane. Don't get me wrong. It is still her using the knowledge that she has in order to like avoid this problem, but she did not do it alone. She did not fully decide to do that. I think, yes, the whole stalling out problem and all that, they set that up, but I don't think they really should have. I think having her know enough to be able to just pull back up the plane without having to set this thing where she needs to pull the thrust would have allowed her to do it all on her own and would have made that moment hit a lot harder, rather than, I recognize that there's a problem, but I don't know how to solve it, so I still need to go consult this other pilot.
I think everything you just said is a bunch of shit, if I'm honest.
Okay, but that's like the entire show. What is specifically wrong with this?
I don't think anything what you said negates anything from the moment of her having to find the courage to do it unguided, because she doesn't have anyone talking her through it. It's not like she's constantly saying, hey, asking for the next bit, what do I do next? What do you do next? Like, she gets the one little vital extra thing that she wasn't taught before to try and help the situation out, and still has to do all the rest of it on her own. And the reveal that she's pulling it off, of course, is when like Heston and that are in the helicopter and they're just coming over the ridge or whatever. Yeah. And they see her, and he realizes, because they've lost communication, no one can talk to her, that she's completely on her own. And he looks down and says, oh, she's flying that plane. Like, she's actually doing it. She's pulling it off. And obviously, for the drama's sake, he's like, yeah, baby, pull it up, baby. Like, he starts like saying some like dramatic lines.
Damn you, fly.
Yeah, he's getting really dramatic and into it for the effect. But I thought the moment worked really well. I thought there was a good sort of, not a literal pin drop, but the moment she realized, shit, I'm going to have to actually try and do something to the plane completely on my own, with no help, with just what I've learned up until this point. I think that moment actually paid off quite well. I don't think anything with them asking because the pilot barely is useful here.
No, I get what you're saying. I see where you're coming from with it, and I do think that there is a payoff there. I think it just could have been a lot stronger. And now that I'm watching back the sequence also, I think that the actual moment of climax, the tension of it, there isn't really anything. Like, that's kind of just how they're shooting it. It's kind of a cinematography issue, but the only payoff we get is Charlton Heston and crew there just being like, she did it. Like, there's no visual cue of showing the plane like barely cresting over a mountain or something like that. And I get that's kind of a limitation of what they were able to do with the aviation footage of, we can't actually have a 747 barely scrape by a mountain, but it is an issue of, it doesn't feel as strong of a payoff in the end, because it is just a character saying, yeah.
The weird thing is, though, is I think that makes it feel more real to me, is that there's not the almost cheesy shot of just narrowly missing the peak. You know? Like, that's such a...
I mean, I get what you're saying, but you're saying that half the fun of this is in the cheesy...
No, I know.
It being a disaster movie.
I know, but that's the thing. This is the one moment of the movie that I feel like it actually transcended the stupid, cheesy, like, disaster movie like vibe that the rest of it had going on. This was the actual moment in the whole movie that I was kind of impressed and went, oh, you actually paid off something here in a really satisfying way that made her feel like she always felt like the main character, but this felt like, no, she got the growth. She got like the payoff to like being built up and then actually, right. And that's why I think the round of applause that everyone gives her in the plane when she gets down after this, for me, that was like, you know what? I don't, like, obviously they do a bit more tension with like Heston saying there's problems with the plane and all, whatever to like actually land it. But to me, the movie's kind of like reached its climax when like they're all just like thankful that she kept them alive for as long as she has. Like that was like the payoff. That was the happy end. Everything after that is just kind of gravy because obviously they're going to land. So no, I really like that part. I think the back half was quite fun because of this setup and like her having to like take these instructions. Like I said, there's a moment where it was starting to go a bit too far, but then when they kind of brought it all back round to her having to do it on her own, I was like, you know what? That repetition is what made that feel believable. Like it didn't feel like, oh, this is bullshit that she's just magically flying the plane on her own now. Because it's established that she knows how to put the autopilot back on once she's done the little movement that she needs to do. It's established that she knows how to lift the plane up a little bit and turn a little bit, and that's it. That's all it took. So, but of course, there's a point after the first time they talk to her where George Kennedy turns around and says, that terrain out there, it's all mountains. We have to get a pilot on that plane. And that was the premise. That was what I read, is that they have to get a pilot onto a plane that has no pilot. And that was the thing that got me excited about this movie. I was like, yes, this sounds like the bullshit I want. And I had fun with that. I'm not going to lie. They had this military helicopter. They had someone ziplining down. Not Heston. And I swear to you, when they were hovering over the plane and this guy was starting to go at the back of the chopper and he was going to go down, and he was trying to get in the hole, and she was trying to like grab onto him and whatnot. Even before he like stepped off the chopper, I went, okay, this guy is going to die, and that's fine because there's no chance in hell that Heston himself is not getting on that plane. Oh yeah, absolutely. The moment that they say like this is super hyper dangerous, there's no way it's going to happen. And also, we're not sending you in, Charlton Heston. I'm like, well, that means attempt number 1 is a goner. Like, there is no way that's happening. Yeah, and it's actually like his like pulley that like disconnects the tether gets caught on like, debris. Yeah. So he just goes flying. That's believable. Yeah. Yeah. He just goes flying immediately. The only thing that I would critique is that they have as he goes flying off the back, as he loses his thing, everyone on the plane reacts. Everyone on the plane is just like, oh God, no, he slipped, he fell, oh, he didn't make it. And I'm like, dude, he went whizzing by at 500 miles per hour. How the hell did you even see that? I mean, I don't know if this would mean they would see it per se, but to give the movie a slither of like benefit of the doubt here, like it is kind of established that they saw the helicopter come in because previously they were watching the jet that was flying alongside them. So I feel like they're all watching like hawks at the very least. No, that's fair. I guess it's more of like an angle thing of I don't think from the seats they'd be able to see the cockpit area. No. I can only assume that he went flying past some windows. And yeah, probably. Let's just go with that. So Heston's like, okay, I'm going. Strap me in. Like, let's do this before I change my mind. So actually, before we continue, I want to point out there was a little thing introduced on the build up to all this happening where there's like a really shitty TV presenter guy who is introduced, and he's found the wife of the guy that had the heart attack, the pilot that caused this in the first place, and he's brought her to the airport just as sort of as a sign of his like shameless like technique, I guess. It's going to McClane's house in the middle of a big standoff. That's exactly what it is. Well, the thing that got me, so it's one thing that he busts his way into like the control room and starts demanding answers like, hey, you killed this man in his plane, this is your fault. And I'm like, okay, first of all, we know that's just flat out not true. Yeah. But the thing that got me is that when they're walking out to go to the chopper and they're like, time is of the essence because like, hey, that plane's running out of fuel, it's getting into bad territory, like they need to get a pilot up there, and this guy tries to like jump in front of them to say, hey, give me a few moments to get some words in before you do your rescue mission. I'm like, you know it's a rescue mission. Time's kind of important here, you stupid tit. They get the other captain in, the guy who's actually going to be doing the drop, and he's like trying to get in front of him, just being like, sir, what's your plan? How do we plan on doing this? And it's like, maybe he's a bit more preoccupied, my guy. Like, it's not a movie with a high body count, but if somehow something that fell out the plane landed on him, I would have been okay with it.
They repeatedly say throughout this, like, we didn't find the plane or the body of the little plane that hit the 747. We don't know where it is. And then on his drive home, coming out of the sky, it's been up there for hours, just hits his car.
What, has there been a tornado just sort of keeping it up in the air?
Yeah, it's like hailstone currents. It just keeps circling it up, and then boom, down.
Very good, very good. Dear. So yeah, I mean, obviously, Heston gets on the plane, right?
Yeah. So one thing that I did bring up earlier before the spoiler section, and you said you wanted to talk to me about it, is the somewhere about halfway through this, she accidentally changes frequencies. And the reason that happens is because a piece of wreckage falls off the plane itself into this control panel and then changes the frequency. So she doesn't know what it was set at. She doesn't know how to change it back. And she's just kind of is flailing around. The sequence lasts all of about a minute and a half. And they just, in air traffic control, find her on her news station. And then that's it. Yeah. So how do you feel like that pays off better than what I'm giving it credit for?
Because I think you're writing it off as like you expect it to be a problem she has to figure out in the moment, where I'm reading it for what I think it's supposed to be, which is a foreshadowing of this fear of what happens if she loses communication. And this was the false alarm, but later on she does genuinely lose communication. Obviously she just basically tries a bunch of frequencies, and she doesn't get through to the one she was on, but she gets through to like the other airport control tower, and they're like, oh hey, we've got her, we'll just you stay in this frequency, we'll just reroute you through. And so I think it's just about setting up the possibility that all the functions in the cockpit, like including the communications, could go, and this is like a tease for later. And I think it does pay off because they do go later, like it completely gets destroyed later, and she is left on her own, and because that feeds into what I think is the big payoff of her entire character arc. I mean, arc's a bit maybe not the right word. It's not like a character's learned something about herself arc, but in terms of like her functioning in the movie, it's her big payoff. I do think it pays off, but I mean, I didn't think of it that way, so I will give you credit that foreshadowing does exist there. I think it is a good little preamble to that. I guess again, from my perspective, this is a disaster movie, and the way that I view that is, here's a problem, how's the character going to solve it? We just skip over that, but as a foreshadowing instead, I think that does work a lot better. Yeah, because I don't think this movie's quite a list of like, new problems keep popping up, and when we keep solving them. I think it's more, like we can kind of predict the other things that are going to go wrong, and we're kind of trying to get to them in time before they happen. But there's not like new swerves introduced. But
all of a sudden Utah has a brand new mountain that just springs up right there.
Well, the movie Volcano taught us that it could happen.
It could, but only in LA. Only along that fault line.
Well, I mean, LA is a lot like the movie Volcano right now this week at the time of recording.
Is it? I haven't kept up with the news.
Tim had to evacuate his house.
Oh, aye.
Yeah.
I really haven't kept up with the news.
Yeah, there's like lots of fires. It's like the worst set of fires the city's ever had.
How do I ship the snow from my house to LA? I will gladly help the effort.
That would help the problem, yes, if we could teleport all the snow from the places that get too much.
I'll do next day shipping, I don't mind.
Anyway, so Heston gets on the plane, and I thought they were going to do a thing here actually, because his hands get all cut up, and I thought, oh, his hands won't be able to like control anything. He's going to have to still physically have her do it, but he's right there to help her.
Or at the very least, like she would have to like flip the switches and stuff like that while he does the actual steering.
That doesn't happen though. She goes down, makes her announcement. He turns off one engine because it's leaking fuel, and they're all worried about it going up.
Yeah, we get a little mini sequence of one of the passengers, one of the three drunk guys, who has been watching the fluid leak from the wing, and he just has to barge up into the cockpit right then and there and say, hey, we're leaking fuel, to which they respond, we know, please go sit down.
Yeah, we don't care about your opinion. We're well on top of it, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, yeah, basically, the first thing he basically does when he sits down is he's like, shit, so much of this cockpit is fried. Like, I won't even know if the landing gears are I'll flip the switch, but I'll have no way of knowing if some of the things that are supposed to function are functioning.
Right.
So it's like,
so honey, could you go outside and check on that real quick? Thank you.
So it's not going to be smooth just because he's here to land the plane. Like, because now he instantly recognizes all the other problems that she was never even going to notice. He's like, oh shit, oh this may not work, oh and that may not work, oh no.
I just imagine him looking up on like the sensor dashboard and being like, honey, how long has that red light been on? Oh, the whole time. How many parachutes do we have?
Yeah, because one of the things that I was thinking about is they were coming in, it was like, oh, like I guess the airport just knows they're going to be coming in, so they're just keeping the runway clear. Because there's no communication. They can't say, hey, we need to come down now. Like I assume George Kennedy's just like radioing everyone else and saying, hey, keep that runway clear. Because at the very least, they were always aiming for the same airport. They were always aiming for that Salt Lake City airport. So at the very least, they know where they're going to try and land. So yeah, so yeah, you have your big sequence. They do a whole thing where like, you can't quite get the plane to stop once they do land. You know, they like the brakes aren't working, so he has to kind of...
Yeah, they lost brake pressure. So weirdly enough, we commented on that in airport, was that when they were landing, they had to do like this swerve off to the side thing. And I think I made the point of saying like, that should have been its own little thing, like that was focused on, was that they had to swerve over to the side. This movie, they cashed that in. They're like, we're going to have to do something risky in order to stop this plane in time.
Yeah, everyone's stressed. You know, we get the big inflatable chutes, obviously, once they actually do come to a stop. And they've got an ambulance ready to take little Linda Blair straight to the hospital for a kidney transplant. So it's a whole... I mean, I guess if anything else, the one moment where they're all kind of like praying and like really worried before the landing, and like her mum's like clearly like having a breakdown, worried that they're all going to die and not just their daughter, which because at the start of the day she's worried about her daughter dying from the lack of a kidney. Now she's worried about everyone dying because of the scenario.
I think if they expanded a bit on the character developments of the people in back, I think that would have been the most interesting to evaluate. Is this like overprotective mother, someone who's just so concerned about her daughter, like being able to continue living, that she's robbing her of like basic living experiences. And then during the course of this flight, she now has to worry about her own life. And it's like a flip on that. It's a thing where now the daughter has to comfort the mother throughout it. I think that would have been an interesting thing to really explore throughout.
Yeah. One little detail I actually did kind of, it's a very small thing, but Mrs. Petroni, once like the initial thing happens, she ends up just getting up and helping the flight attendants out and actually talking to the other passengers and try to like reassure them. And it kind and it kind of felt like, oh, you like, I don't know if you actually did this line of work or you just know so much because your husband never shuts up about planes, but it felt like she was just chipping in because, oh, they need my help right now. So she goes into like mode, you know?
It felt like she was familiar with the crew because she got up from her seat at one point and like said first name to the flight attendant.
That's right, yeah.
And was just, and like they recognized her. So it seems like she's been very familiar with this crew on board. That being said, I need to talk about the sequence where Mrs. Petroni hops on the phone and talks to her husband.
Oh, so, yes.
Yeah. So at one point, George Kennedy, Mrs. Petroni, is talking to Nancy, trying to talk her through all this stuff going on. And then Mrs. Petroni comes into the cockpit and says, "Is that my husband? Let me talk to him." And it's not a frantic conversation. It's not like, "Oh, you got to help us, you got to help us." It's very much a thing of like, "Hey, you know, the plane's still flying. Everything's all right. We're going to help you out up there. It's going to be fine." And she's like, "Hey, you know, I know you're trying your best, doing whatever you can." But you see, as it cuts over to George Kennedy's side, he's just getting more and more shaken as his wife is talking to him.
It's when he goes to ask, "How's my son?" Right? He sort of breaks, his voice breaks down as he says it. It's like, "Oh, hey, I have to actually contend with the fact that it's not just my wife up there, it's my child." And he does act. Yeah, he actually acts the scene. Like there's some genuine acting going on.
Yeah, and then it all wraps up with the point where it's like a moment of silence. Nobody quite knows what to say. And then Mrs. Petroni says, "I love you." And it cuts to him and you can see he's trying to say it back, but he is just broken. He is unable to say anything. And she just like knows what the silence means, knows that he means it, and that they hang up the line and to move on to the next scene. But like that performance from George Kennedy was like the most intense I felt that anyone cared about this plane going down in the entire movie.
Yeah. Cause most of the tension I enjoyed was the fear of someone who's not a pilot having to fly a giant plane filled with 100+ people. That's where I was getting my attention, and I actually think it reached into pretty decent territory at times. That said, though, I mean, yeah, part of the fun of this was like the weird character archetypes that were filling the plane up. It was the dodgy rear screen projection and the build to the accident happening, and then everything that comes from after that. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the movie. I'm sure there's some other little character things we didn't talk about, but like honestly, they're all quite fleeting to me. There's a whole thing where the actress is like recording like notes for a book she's writing, and she puts it into like a sort of like lockbox that might survive a crash.
Yeah, and then they as they're disembarking the plane, which for some reason the disembarking of this plane is very frantic. I guess they're concerned that like the plane could go up or explode or something, but it just felt weird from a pacing issue that once they landed, they still were frantically like, everyone run away. And then we don't even get like a wrap up of the runaway before credits. Like it just is going high in energy all the way right up to the very end.
Well, no, I would argue that just right before, when Heston and Nancy come out of the plane, they come out at a sort of leisurely pace where they're sort of contemplating what's just happened to them, and that's when the titles start hitting.
That's true.
So I think it basically felt like everyone else was panicking, but the pilot was like, no, it's fine. We're good.
Yeah.
I'm just going.
We did it. Oh, that was, in terms of character stuff, that is probably the last thing we should mention, is that, you know, beginning of the movie was Heston saying, hey, let's not rush into this, let's not do that. Before they take off, he ends up calling Nancy on the plane's phone and basically says, hey, you know, we left in a bad place. I want to make sure we're good. And she's like, yeah, we're fine, whatever. And she kind of means it, but she hangs up the phone before he says, I love you, which seems to be a big step there, or at least it feels like it is. And then as we're ending the movie, as they're literally coming down onto the runway, and he doesn't know if the wheels are out or anything, that's when he turns back and says it to her face, like, hey, I love you. And they do finally land. So it feels like their relationship, you know, he's committed now. He's able to say, I'm with you. And that's basically where it wraps up.
Yeah. And that's pretty much it. That's Airport 75. I had a good enough time that I was entertained. I think it kind of rose above its level, at least that one time for me. And I was like, you know what? I had a decent time. Admittedly, my expectations weren't like particularly high, obviously. I mean, I came into this thing being fairly lukewarm. Even though I like some Airport, I still had a lot of complaints with it. So I came into this not really expecting a whole lot, other than just maybe this one might be a bit more stupid and therefore a bit more fun. And that's kind of what I got. Although, like I say, I think that the build up to her having to actually fly the plane for a little bit or make a maneuver without any help, I think was surprisingly better than anything I was expecting to get from this movie. So a little point for that. But
yeah, I mean, I will say that talking to you through this, like actually talking through, seeing what you're getting out of it does illuminate a little bit more for me. I would still say personally, like, I did still find the second half more dull than not. Again, the comparison I keep on making is, I think the most exciting thing, the most off-the-wall thing to happen is the inciting incident. I don't think it ever reached that peak again in terms of how crazy it went. So if we're judging by that sort of standard of, okay, well, we're going to be doing a bit more crazier, more, you know, stereotypical 70s disaster movie stuff, I don't feel like it really hit that level, but I do see more of what it was than what you were originally saying. So yeah, that's that.
Yeah, you wanted that the first a pilot who was trying to get into the plane, when he went flying, you wanted to see him go into an engine. That would
pretty much
peak the moment for you.
I want to see something crazy, and I do appreciate the fact that they did stick more to actual aerial footage rather than miniatures. I think it really did lend a credence to, okay, this plane is actually flying here, but it comes at the cost of, we got to give up some of these sillier things going on outside the plane moments just due to, we're using real props. We can't actually barely crest over an airplane or actually have a guy go flying off the side.
I'm also reminded that IMDb had one of the genres as dark comedy. I don't know if I agree with that now, having watched the movie.
Yeah, I'm the only way I could see it is based off those little one-liners, those little things that wrap up the conversations. The fact that as they're disembarking the plane, Jerry Stiller wakes up and goes, "Oh, are we here already?" Like, those are the only tiny little things that make it slightly comedic, but it's not a dark comedy.
Yeah. All right. What was your scene of the movie, David?
I am torn between the airplanes crashing in, so the inciting incident, or George Petroni's little emotional scene. Or George Kennedy's, I mean, Mr. Petroni. I think I'm going to give it to... I'm going to give it to the Petroni scene. I think that it as much as I really liked Petroni in the last movie, I didn't give him the MVP character because I just felt like there was going to be more of him in store. And at the risk of him becoming even more impressive later on, I at least want to give him this little shot of glory here. I think that this is a very well acted, well done scene. And like I said, it was the high point in terms of somebody caring about whether or not this plane actually lands. It was the most emotionally invested I got at any point throughout this.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. I kind of said it already earlier, but it has to be where she has to fly the plane completely unaided for a bit and get the altitude back up. I think that's just a surprisingly good moment in the movie for me. Yeah. So I'll go with that. MVP?
As much as I was just saying Petroni's praises, I do think that the best actor in the movie, the best performance given, is going to be Karen Black as Nancy. I think that as much as I was, not super on the back half of the movie where she's doing most of her stuff, I will not deny that she is not giving it her all. Like, she is coming off as terrified. She's really doing a good job of being this, like, trying to focus on the instructions given while being put through this absolutely traumatic event. It does a really great job of portraying the character here.
Yeah, it has to be Nancy. It's her movie, pretty much. She gets all the big stuff. She has the big moments, and I think she carries it. So, yep, got to be her. All right, what are you rating Airport 75?
It's real close, but I do have to stand by. I think I do still prefer the first Airport a little bit more. I will say, pacing-wise, it's, the back half of the first one did have some issues. The landing sequence was boring as sin, but I think that I was more connected with the characters because they did elaborate a bit more on them. It wasn't so much of just one-note things where, honestly, most of them didn't impact the plot at all. So, all in all, I'm going to make it real close, but it is still going to be a 5.5 for me.
Yeah, I'm a little bit torn because it's definitely going higher than the first one for me, so it's at least a 6.5. But I was impressed enough with some of those things in the back half that I really liked that I kind of want to go up to the 7. I feel like it's maybe a touch high though, just based on some of the side characters, the passengers being just kind of not that great in the first place. But I'll do it. I'll say 7. I'll say it's good, which honestly is a lot more positive than I was expecting to be.
Yeah, same.
To get into it. So I'll say it just scrapes the good for me. So there you go.
So the question comes down to, where does it make the cut?
I think it's still cutting it close, though, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to fight you if you were saying makes the cut. But
I'm not delusional, because as much as I'm saying it's a 7 and I enjoyed it, I don't think that it's, it is what it is. So
yeah, we're not going into this with high art saying you got to watch this movie. It's okay.
Yeah. So there you go. And obviously next time we have Airport 77, which, looking like I did last time, I've looked at the one sentence premise in IMDb, and it's very different again.
Okay. From the first one even?
Yes, from both. Yes, it's very different. In fact, if anything, I'd compare it to another disaster movie that isn't a plane disaster movie.
Oh. Okay. I'm not sure. Obviously, we've done so many. Is it Avalanche? Are they going to hold a rec center thing on the plane?
No. It's not a rec center. I mean, obviously this is on a plane, but like it does something with it. Anyway, some notable cast members sticking out to me: Christopher Lee and Jack Lemmon are both in this next one.
I can dig it.
So that's interesting. And as much as we said that George Kennedy was in all 4, I'm not seeing these. I mean, I think we saw it on his cast list, but he must be in a really small role in this because I'm not seeing him anywhere in the top.
Oh, he is right down at the very, very bottom before rest of cast listed alphabetically, along with Jimmy Stewart.
Oh yeah, they're both at the bottom. So they've both got cameos then, is what I'm getting from that. Okay.
Probably, yeah.
Interesting. All right, so yes, very different plot once again. So we'll see how the next one goes. But that is the show pretty much. I'll just tell you about Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. You can support us over there, help keep the show coming, as well as the other podcast we do, the Atomic Cinema Experiment, which is all sci-fi movies. So check out that as well, of course. But we do 2 monthly shows exclusive to Patreon. We do Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection. We've recently done things like Paris, Texas. We do Akira Kurosawa movies, all that kind of stuff. Ingmar Bergman, Andrei Tarkovsky. And then we also have Extra Reels, which is where we do the worst movies of all time. Hopefully so bad they're good, but not always the case. You know, as previously mentioned, we have done Hot Frosty. We have done Skyscraper. We've got Uwe Boll coming up. We've done some Neil Breen in the past. So if that sounds fun,
come on by.
Yes, it's not fun for us, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah. So there you go. That is the show. That has been the Collector's Cut. So thank you very much for joining. We do appreciate it. Keep watching movies. And if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.